Scott Heidler reports from the border town of Mae Sot in Thailand.
Mojo was a student leader in the 1988 uprising in Myanmar. For that, he spent 12 years in a Yangon prison.
Yes. No position.
At a Mae Sot museum dedicated to Myanmar's political prisoners, he shows us the brutality of everyday life.
Punish position.
Torture techniques that Myanmar security forces have used for decades in their attempt to squash dissent. The junta is accused of continuing these methods today, but he thinks the protesters happening now on the streets of Myanmar are much different than past uprisings.
This is going to be the last fight to end the dictatorship and a fight of judgment. Even though the civilians do not want to become refugees fleeing from war, the situation might arise in which they might very well have to become refugees.
Along this section of the Thai-Myanmar border, there's little preventing people from crossing over. Because of the volatile state in Myanmar, Thai authorities have stepped up patrols, but have also intensified contact with those on the other side.
We are monitoring the situation, and we have been communicating with our neighbors, especially the armed ethnic groups along the border. We have been sharing information.
The Mui River here serves as the border between Thailand and Myanmar. One of the Karen ethnic armies, you can see one of their camps right across the river. They say in there they are sheltering hundreds of people who have fled the increasingly violent crackdown by Myanmar security forces. We met the head of a Mae Sot refugee committee in a football stadium local officials will use as temporary housing if refugees start coming across the border. As many as 1,000 would be housed here. He's concerned about resources, as the Mae Sot area has been home to Myanmar's refugees for more than 40 years, fleeing fighting and economic hardship.
If many new refugees come to Thailand, there might be a strain on resources for the existing refugees. If donor organizations provide funding for the new arrivals, we'll probably lose out.
The sun sets on Friendship Bridge, ending a day in these uncertain times for Mae Sot, a community that's for decades served as the main gateway between Thailand and Myanmar, both physically and culturally. But with the unrest now unfolding in Myanmar, the differences are becoming more evident, the separation becoming more defined.
And Scott joins us now live from Mae Sot on the Thailand-Myanmar border. Scott, describe to us, tell us a bit more about the situation at the border there. It looks very quiet right now, but that could change, of course.
It could, Foley, and what's very interesting, as we saw in that story, Mae Sot here is really kind of a cultural and a physical bridge to Myanmar. A lot of the people who live here have relatives over there, or there's some kind of relationship. But one thing, and going to what you said about how dead it looks here right now, that's partly because this area, this bridge, Friendship Bridge here, has been closed for over a year because of COVID-19. And that also impacts this community because of the trade, the necessary trade for the economy here between these two countries. There is still another open land bridge for cargo to go back and forth. But because of COVID-19, because of the increasingly violent situation across the border in Myanmar, that trade has really ground to a halt. But going to what was also discussed in the story, and that is the community here has already, over the last 4 decades, absorbed those fleeing violence in Myanmar. So there's concern, as we heard from that refugee committee, there's concern here just what kind of resources, more resources they will need and what they can get if there is a flood of refugees fleeing the current violence across the border in Myanmar. Again, Thai officials are preparing for it, but right now there is concern when that ultimately could happen. What kind of extra resources is this community, this already hurting community, going to get?
Scott, thank you very much for that. Scott Heidler reporting there live from the Thailand-Myanmar border.